Hello everyone, and welcome to another video here on cow herd management. Hey, so I wanted to jump in today and just kind of go over some creep feeding basics. It's a really popular tool out there, and honestly it's not one that we use personally, so I wanted to bring my wife Kayla in here because she's really well versed in this with her career and kind of the research and trials that she's seen. She's definitely more well versed in the basics of creep feeding. And so I'm going to let her introduce herself a little bit and then we'll get started.
Well, my name is Kayla. I'm Stuart's wife, but I am a Purina rep and I work in the Southwest Missouri area. So I've been with the company now over 4.5 years. And my background is pretty diverse. Definitely focused more on equine and horse nutrition through college, but when I was in graduate school, got to focus a lot on the ruminant nutrition side and have had a lot of exposure to the beef industry as well. So in my career now, I work primarily with grass cattle producers on the cow-calf side. I have a little bit of stocker operations, and then, but we focus a lot on programs like creep feeding and early weaning and things, strategies to help get the most out of your forage. And creep feeding is a great way to do that.
All right, so let's just go ahead and jump in here. Like, when to creep feed? I mean, should you have the creep feeders full as soon as those calves start hitting the ground?
So, really, what we would recommend, and there's some that kind of do it every different way, but what I would usually recommend and where I start is we typically say in that creep feeding period, research shows that you're going to get an average of about 56 pounds of added gain on those calves by the time you wean if you creep feed. And so usually we see that happen in an 80 to 90 day window. So typically we're going to recommend that you would start creep feeding 80 to 90 days before you're planning on weaning.
Sounds like a good plan. And so that kind of covers our second question: how long to creep feed? That 80 to 90 days?
80 to 90 day window for sure. And the thing to watch there too, if you do it for too long, they can start to get really fleshy. So, of course, genetics is going to play into that too. So, I mean, the whole point of creep feeding, and I think this is kind of something that we need to make sure why would you creep feed? So there's kind of two reasons. So one, you want to get the most out of your forage, and sometimes depending on the year, grass is not just going to do it for you, especially if you're someone that's wanting to optimize genetics and optimize the highest weaning weights. Creep feed's going to help you do that. So 80 to 90 days is a pretty good rule of thumb. If you do it for longer, just watch too. We don't want to get them too fleshy. And then as far as when you wean and things like that.
Yeah. Condition.
Right.
So, all right, so let's go over some creep feeding myths. Let's say we've got a drought type condition and we want to take some pressure off of them cows. So we're going to give these calves some creep feed to help stretch our grass and make it easier on the cow.
That is the most common myth with creep feeding for sure, because if you hear nothing else, it's this. Creep feeding is not going to take pressure off of your cows, because those calves, they're going to go fill up on creep feed, but they're still going to go to mom and they're still going to nurse and get milk. So they're not actually doing any less to take pressure off your cow. So if you're in a situation where you're in a drought and it's kind of dry and you want to take pressure off of your cows, honestly, the strategy that I would recommend and that most recommend would be to go ahead and wean them early. So versus putting the creep feed out. We don't put creep feed out to take pressure off the cows. We put it out to optimize your forage and optimize your resources and your performance genetics to get that added weaning weight by the time you wean.
Yeah, and that's one thing for us. Instead of creep feeding, whenever we've gotten to drought conditions, we've just gone ahead and early weaned. It's really my favorite tool. I think it does a lot for your grass and it does a lot for your cows. So that's kind of the route we go. Any other basics we should cover over creep feeding? About how many calves per creep feeder, or how many creep feeders per calf?
It kind of depends on the size of your creep feeder. I mean, usually on kind of a standard one, you can get away with like 15 to 20 calves pretty easily. Make sure kind of we say that 2-finger rule as far as bunk space on the end spacing in the feeder is pretty important. So you want to make sure they have plenty of space to be able to eat, but you also want to make sure, when I say 2 fingers, so the bottom of that creep gate, you shouldn't be able to get more than 2 fingers in there. If it's too big, then you're going to have way too much feed, way too much waste of feed, that kind of thing. So that's a pretty good strategy to keep in mind as far as space and things like that.
Perfect. Yeah, and I think the biggest thing to remember is, just understanding the investment you have in the creep feeders, because they're not cheap and they're not free. And plus, when we're creep feeding, we want to make sure we get the right feed in there that's going to help these calves and not get them too fleshy. One thing we want to focus on is condition. That's so much of getting your market premium. So, anyways, I think that about wraps it up, unless you got anything else.
No, I mean, I would just encourage, when you do creep feed, to your point about the fleshiness, like really kind of take into consideration the feed conversion too. I don't know if you're in a situation where you can weigh your calves whenever you wean, but a lot of the seed stock producers that I work with do. So just kind of make sure whatever feed you're putting out there, just make sure you're managing it, that there's not too much waste, that kind of thing. So creep feeders are self-fed but not self-managed. So just keep that in mind too when they're out there.
Self-fed, not self-managed. I think that's a pretty good place to end it. We'll see you next time. Thank you.